This happened about a month ago. My parents own a farm about a 45-minute drive away from where I live. I often go there to help work since I'm trying to save up for a car and whatnot, and since my grandmother recently hurt her back too. The week that I was out there working, I decided that it would be fun to have one of my friends too, who live close to my grandparents, just out for the night camping. So, 3 days prior, I called him and we set up a date to go onto my grandparents' property and just have some fun. The night came and my friend arrived at the house and we packed up supplies such as food and water to put out the fire and whatnot. A 2-man tent, sleeping bags, and just all your normal camping gear. When we got to our preferred camping site, it was already dark, so we lit a fire and got to work on setting up camp. We had fun, mostly talking about how much school sucked, new music that we discovered and which were the hottest celebrities, and eventually we decided to call it a night, seeing that it was 1:30 in the morning and had to leave that following day. So we settled in our tent and started to go to sleep. Well, at least we tried. I was laying in my sleeping bag just thinking when, all of a sudden, I started to hear footsteps outside our tent. Now, you guys could say that it could be my grandparents coming out to check on us, but we were out pretty far on the property from the house and had the only off-road vehicle that could make it out there. Plus, my grandparents went to sleep super early, so I doubt it was them. We don't have any large animals on that part of the farm either, and those footsteps, they were definitely heavy, almost like a person's. So I sat up and whispered to my friend that there was something outside the tent. He just whispered back, "There's no one there, stop it." But he still sat up and listened. My friend knows that I don't fuck with shit like this. I mean, I joke around a lot, but not with this kind of stuff. So we listened for a bit but didn't hear it anymore. So we laid back down and tried to just shrug it off as a deer or something. I would love to say that it ended here, but as I was laying there, I hear them again, only this time, much closer. And to be honest, I'm petrified. I felt just really vulnerable in a tent. I can't move very well and I can't even see what's out there. Plus, how's a thin layer of cloth going to protect me, right? The footsteps continue closer and closer to the tent until it's right outside the door, and now I can hear it sniffing. Not like a dog's short and quick pace sniffs, though. Long and hard sniffs, like it was trying to desperately catch a whiff of something delicious. It goes on for a few minutes, and then my friend shifts in his sleep, and it stops. All is silent, and then I hear a voice, and I can't make out what it says. But I know it's not a voice that I've heard before. The voice was just whispering unintelligent words as it moved away from the tent, and I was really scared at this point. Eventually the sound goes away, and I don't remember dozing off. But the next thing I knew, I was awoken again by the sounds of the tent moving. I turned over to see if my friend was getting up to go pee or something, but he was sound asleep. With my heart thumping in my chest at this point, I reached behind him and grabbed the machete that we kept there in the rear of the tent, and I slowly turned to face my side of the tent. Something was moving it, though. I sat up really slowly and began to move towards the zipper. Doing this, I accidentally hit my head on the hanging LED lantern, causing the tent to stop moving. I froze, and then the footsteps started again. Only this time, they were at an even pace heading towards our burnt-out fire. I grabbed the zipper, and trying to make as little noise as possible, I opened the flap. Outside, the moon was shining bright, and just at the corner of the fire pit, I could make out the silhouette of a human-like figure crouched and looking right at me. Apparently, my moving and unzipping had woken my friend up too, and he saw me looking outside. "Dude, what are you doing?" he asked. "Shh, I see something," I said. Then out of nowhere, he yells at the top of his lungs, "Whoever is out there, we have a fucking gun. Get the fuck out of here." The thing takes off down the trail, but not running like a human. It was sort of doing a crouching gallop, like a golem from the Lord of the Rings, if you can picture that. I zip up the tent and lay down, clutching the machete to my chest, and when I woke up the next morning, I took a look around. There were footprints all around our tent, but they transformed halfway around from what looked like to be human to deer, like almost in mid-step. Now, I've heard of skinwalkers before, and I'm pretty sure that's what this thing was. Sure, those prints could have just been a deer or something, But if it hadn't have been for my friends scaring it off, I'm not too sure if it would have left us alone, and that is really strange behavior for a deer. The thing that scares me the most, though, is that my grandfather is a skeptic, and he doesn't believe in anything like that. Yet, when I told him about what happened, he went pretty much white and there was a look of dread across his face. This happened about 6 years ago. I was working at a tanning salon on the south side of Chicago, and on Mondays, the salon side was closed. So I was used to just being there and being the only employee working at the front desk to let tanners in. Now, it isn't the best neighborhood, but I was used to it by this point because I had worked there for a few years, and I knew that there were homeless people and prostitutes that walked the street. Also, in the alley behind the building, many homeless guys' bodies had been found there. I'm a female, blonde, 5'2" and small stature, but had always been not the one to be afraid of confrontation. I had been used to it at this point, and never had a huge problem really, and I'm a daughter of a frontline Marine in the Vietnam War, and knew to just never show fear. I had my fair share of bums coming in when the weather was bad too, and I would just stand up behind the counter and tell them to get out, or if you're not tanning, then you need to fucking leave. For some reason, my tone usually made them immediately take off. There were a few homeless men too that I'd see in front of the building that I would let take out cigarette butts out of our cigarette disposal bin. Hell, that was less work for me to do anyway, so why not? I wouldn't tell them to leave, though I was supposed to, unless a customer was coming in or out of the building. But there was one Monday, though, that I was the only employee, and there were a few clients tanning. During this time, I was behind the desk and was just clicking through Facebook and stuff. A few minutes went by and I felt something that I'd never felt before, just an overwhelming feeling of fear, and I actually started trembling. I didn't know what the fuck was going on, but then I looked up, and at the desk in front of me, in front of what was the front doors, you're able to see clients come in and out, and holy fuck, there was a man, almost taller than the door frame, face pressed against the door glass, just staring at. When we locked eyes, I noticed his eyes were kind of dead, if that's the right word. There was just no expression on him, and he was just staring at me. I grabbed the phone and stood up and walked around the desk where I had to literally lock the door as he was pressed against it. He then started banging on the door and jiggling the handle and all that. And I knew right then that he was not a customer and not someone that I wanted in here with me. So I walked to the other side of the spa and shut the door and called my sister because I knew something wasn't right. This man just wasn't right. As I'm on the other side, I hear the front door open and I'm now in tears, not knowing what's about to happen, and someone comes into the salon side that I was on and it was completely dark and I'm just trying to hide, and I see a male figure walking my way and I thought, oh shit, this is it, isn't it? But it was one of the male tanners that started asking if I was okay. I started crying at this point, which is really unlike me, and he said it's okay. I'll call the police, and when I went to leave, he barged in saying, "Where is she? Where's that girl? Where's the girl that I saw at the desk?" The male tanner, which was my saving grace that day, said to the guy that she's obviously busy and to get out of here, and then he ran off. I thanked the man and cried and hugged him, and even though he knew something wasn't right with this man, he made sure that I was okay. He stayed with me until the police came too, and I just told them that he was just pressed up against the glass and very sternly asking where I'd gone. I had called my boss after that, and she told me that she would check the surveillance cameras outside, and I worked the next day and asked to watch with her, and what I saw was just way worse than those dead eyes. The cameras had shown me sitting at the computer and all that, and him coming around the back of the building. He had looked at me through multiple windows, finally coming to the front door, timed for almost 5 minutes, and I hadn't noticed for 5 minutes. What happened next would terrify me for the rest of my life too, because as he was standing there without me even knowing, his hand was down his pants, if you catch my drift. I hadn't noticed when I looked up because the desk was waist height. We called the police again to show them the video too, and I was just in complete shock and horror. I mean, what would have happened had I not seen him and got the balls to get up and lock the door in front of him? But what would have happened had there been a female tenor leaving or letting him in or something? What would have happened if the male tenor had just let the man in? All I know is that I know that that male tenor probably saved my life that day. 2 months later, I was working for St. Baldrick's Foundation, where I was shaving heads for children's cancer awareness, something I do every year. I have different clients. Some want to chat. Some want to know where I work so they can see me and get their hair cut again. A middle-aged man came to my booth and started up a conversation. I told him where I worked and he froze and asked, "Were you and are you the girl working with that man?" And we both knew what he was referring to, and I said, "Yes, that was me. I still work there." And am I allowed to ask what happened? He started apologizing over and over again, and he was the police officer that had come to my work that day. And he told me that that man had just been released from prison that day. He was apparently arrested down the street, fondling himself that day again, and was now behind bars yet again. He told me not to be afraid, but I still don't even know the guy's name, and if or when he's released again, I don't have anything to go off of that would protect me. And so a few weeks later, I just left the job, and now they're actually currently out of business. The one thing that I'll never forget from that day was the man's dead eyes, and also the man that saved my life. And I guess he'll just never know my appreciation. When I was about 8, I lived in a small town in southwest England. It was just me and my mum home since my dad was away on a business trip. We had a basement which we rarely went down to since there was not much down there apart from a few old things that we just didn't need. I had been noticing food was going missing, and we couldn't figure out where it was going. I even searched the basement a few times, but when I was down there, I just felt like I was being watched, so I avoided going down there. One night, though, I was laying in bed awake just trying to go to sleep, when suddenly, I heard my mum call my name from downstairs, although something just seemed off about her voice. I got out of bed and was about to walk downstairs when I was pulled aside. It was my mom, and she pulled me into her bedroom and closed the door silently. I tried asking her what was happening, but she just told me to be quiet. I heard my name being called every minute or so, and my mom called the cops and told them that there was a person downstairs trying to lure me down there. They told her to remain silent and hidden until the cops arrived, and we waited for about 5 minutes, all the while my name was being called, until we heard fast footsteps coming up the stairs. The door opened, and we were relieved to see the police in the doorway. We moved soon after, and I was just told at the time that it was our old house and it was haunted, which I found out that it was a lie about 8 years later. When I was about 16, my mum told me the real story, too. Apparently, a lady who I'll refer to as Jane escaped a psychiatric ward based near our house where she was placed after murdering her 2 children. She then walked to a random house, which happened to be ours, and just hid in the basement, stealing food whilst we were asleep. This terrified me since I had actually been down there, and that feeling of being watched was real. And while that was creepy, it wasn't as bad as the next part. Apparently, on the night the police came, she'd been holding a knife and calling my name, hoping that I would go down the stairs so that she could get me. And if it wasn't for my mum, I would have gone down there too. The only reason I know all this is because the police arrested her and got this out of her at the police station. She was sent back to the ward, and now I'm 25, and the only reason I'm bringing this up is because I just received a news alert saying that this lady, she apparently just broke out again. So please, if you live in the Southwest, be alert and please just stay safe. So my sister and we were talking with my parents a couple of days ago about our childhood. While we were talking, I remembered that my mum used to tell my aunts about this creepy apartment that we used to live in. So I decided to ask her about it. Back then, we moved in and out of apartments because of my dad's job, and this story takes place in one of the first ones that we lived in. The apartment was really small. Coming in, you went right into the kitchen or living room, and on the right was the master bedroom. The 4 of us slept in that room, but on 2 different beds. My parents' bed was in front of the bathroom, and my sister in my bed was in front of the closet. This is important for later in the story. So, the first few weeks after moving in, things were normal. But after a while, my mom said that she started noticing strange things in the apartment. Nothing too out of the ordinary. Just a couple of things went missing from time to time and appeared days later in completely different places from where they were when they got lost. This could easily be explained by us kids, as I was 5, and my sister was 3 when this happened. But after a couple of weeks of things going missing, my mom said that she had a nightmare where something called her name from inside the bathroom, so she decided to go and check, but when she opened the door to the bathroom, she woke up. She said that she was really freaked out too, and couldn't go back to sleep. The next day, things were normal again, and my mom ended up forgetting about the dream until she went to sleep again. She ended up having the same dream, but this time, when she woke up, she realized that she couldn't move. Then, she noticed that the bathroom door started to open, and she saw a thing crawling from the door to her bed. As it got closer, she kept trying to wake up my dad, but she just wasn't able to move. She told us that she could feel it crawling up the bed too and getting on top of her. She said it looked like a malformed fetus or something. When it was on her chest, it started grabbing at her face and hugging her. She had no idea how to get it off of her, so she decided to start praying in her mind and telling this thing to leave. And after a while of doing this, the thing started to crawl down the bed and into the bathroom again until it was just completely gone. As soon as it was gone, my mom was able to move, and she started crying and woke my dad up. And obviously, he just brushed her off and told her that it was just a bad dream. The next day, my mom didn't want to go into the room or the bathroom, and when night came, she was just terrified of going to sleep again. But when she did eventually fall asleep, she ended up having the exact same dream again too. And this ended up becoming a regular occurrence for my mom for the next couple of months, but after a while she says that the fetus thing actually started talking to her. It started calling her mom and crying like a baby when it was on her chest. It got so bad that my mom didn't want to sleep anymore, and there were actually a couple of times that she would go days without sleep. She ended up getting really pale and depressed too, and my dad started to take her a little more seriously at this point. My mom has been a Catholic her whole life, so my dad decided to buy her a small cross that she could put under her pillow, thinking that it would stop this thing. But of course it didn't. If anything, it actually made things worse. Pretty soon, my little sister started having bad dreams too. She doesn't remember them now because she was 3, but my mom says that my sister would tell her that babies scared her at night, and that she didn't want to sleep anymore either. And that's when my dad finally took my mom seriously and took her to see a priest. The priest told her that somebody may have had an abortion in that bathroom, and he gave them holy water and told them to throw it around the apartment. They did, but it also didn't work. After a few more days of bad dreams, my dad saw no other option but to just move apartments. So we did, and just like that, my mom and sister's bad dreams just stopped. Is that a coincidence? I don't know, but my mom still doesn't like to talk about it. She gets really creeped out whenever somebody brings it up. And so, to be honest, I believe her. This happened to me a few years ago on Halloween. It was the first time my mom had finally agreed to let me and my siblings hand out candy to children in our neighborhood. So, like teenagers usually do, we dressed up and excitedly awaited to hand out candy. The night went easily enough, and the kids in our neighborhood were excited to have another house to visit, and we were happy to see the pure smiles on their faces when they told us about their costumes. As the night began to end, we split the leftover candy between us, and we sat on the couch trading Kit Kats for Reese's and stupid stuff like that when there was an urgent fast knock at the door. My mom looked at us with a mixture of concern and confusion and told us to go upstairs. The only reason we had found this odd is because we had already turned our front porch light off, and we weren't expecting anyone else this night. The rest of this story I pieced from my mom since I was upstairs and kind of unaware of the situation for most of the night. So apparently a man, a scruffy, rough-looking guy, was standing on our porch when my mom opened the door. He immediately said in a rushed voice, "Can I come inside?" My mom, feeling like this wasn't a man that she would have even opened the door for, immediately stuttered a no as she tried to shut the door. The man stuck out his hand to the door, and my mom is short and small-framed, with pretty much no strength. So the man could have easily ripped the door open and made his way inside. But luckily for us, my dad was downstairs just as this was happening, and my dad is tall and muscular and a former Marine. And as soon as he heard my mum struggling to shut the door on this guy, he rushed over and told the guy to fuck off and pulled my mum away and slammed the door shut and deadbolted it. My dad told us to turn the lights off right after that and to hide in our rooms because apparently the guy had started circling our house, and on top of that, 3 cop cars came screeching down the road just as my dad locked the door. My 3 siblings and I just waited in our pitch-dark rooms for what felt like forever, afraid that this guy would see us through the bedroom window or something, which wasn't covered with anything at the time. After the guy had been detained and found, the cops knocked on our door, and here is apparently what happened. The guy had been running from the cops that night and found the first house on the street to try and escape getting caught. Not only that though, but the cops, they found a gun hidden in our bushes in the backyard. The guy had hid his gun because he knew that he was going to be arrested and didn't want to get into even more trouble for being armed. And so, I don't know what would have happened to my mum or any of us if my dad hadn't come down the stairs that night. The thought that that man had a gun on him while trying to force his way into our house, it really scares me to this day. In fact, I make sure to never answer doors unless I know who's there now. So I was browsing Reddit the other day and I found a story about Lower Valley Pike. I knew when the author gave the location that it sounded familiar, so I Googled mapped it and I'd actually been around there at some point. And turns out that around that area is home to a good deal of weird stuff. None of this happened to me, but to my wife, and these are her experiences that she shared directly with me. So my wife went to college in the area of the Link Post and has her own unsettling stories about those years. In the Link Post, the author mentions all of the cars on the streets with all the doors wide open, and that beats anything that she's ever told me as far as creep level. But when I relayed that story to her, she wasn't surprised at all and said that the whole place always just made her feel uncomfortable. So her school was a shy of 15 to 20 minutes from the road mentioned in the Link Post, Lower Valley Pike. The school was an extremely strict and a total dry campus. Cigarettes and alcohol would get you expelled on the first offense. The RDs and the RAs were sent out to the typical places people would try and hide in order to bust people too. For this reason, she and her friends would go a good distance away to do their partying and whatnot. The area is and was pretty remote, and there's a good deal of a scenic wooded area, so at 10 or 20 minutes into, that felt further away than it was. But the distance was worth it because, you know, nobody wants to be expelled over a pack of Virginia Slims, if you get my drift. Well, obviously I have no explanation for the Link Post. The things that she told me are more along the lines of humans being the real monsters, such as animal sacrifices, finding makeshift altars with children's things on them and someone's blood, explicit things done to baby dolls and things hanged from trees that obviously just didn't belong there. She says that Clifton, Ohio and the surrounding area was always just eerie at night, and said that in the late fall, things just got downright unsettling. Once, on one of these trips to BFE for some Boone's farm, she walked away from a group of friends to pee, and found a large garbage bag full of domestic-type animals, dogs and cats that had no signs of injuries other than they had their throats cut and blood drained almost completely. My wife is hunted and is familiar with the idea that big game needs to have the blood drained so it doesn't spoil the meat, but said that nobody was going to eat these animals, and she also informed me that that practice is unnecessary. Needless to say, this was enough to freak out a typical group of college girls. Another time, she came across a large plastic rubber-style baby doll that, again, had its throat slit, was naked, and had a hole cut in its genital region and stuffed with things. She said in a number of times in her 4 years in that area that they came across a decent-sized fire set just in the middle of the road randomly. She said that there'd be no reason for them to be there either. No house nearby, just a wood fire on asphalt. One year, she volunteered to help clean for people in the area as part of a large service project. She and a friend went to one house, and she says that she experienced a complete feeling of utter dread the whole time that she was there with no explanation. Just that pit of your stomach feeling like something is bad and every part of her body was just screaming to get away from there. She didn't see anything or have any odd occurrences while there, just that the whole place felt bad and the woman of the house was really weird. And when I asked her to elaborate on weird, she couldn't. My wife says that she always assumed that it was some kind of Satanist stuff the whole time, and a few of her friends actively went out looking for creepy things after they came across them, the first few times anyway. But she said that she never did because everything she saw made her feel sick, and she didn't want to find more. I didn't know my wife when she was in college, and so I've asked her to take me and show me around, tell me stories, take me to local places, and she has once. She showed me her dorm and all that type of stuff, and on the way there out in the middle of nowhere was a random house with things hanged in a tree that were not decorations. The kids' toys, maybe, I'm not too sure, but I told her to pull over and asked if she saw it. And she just kept going and said, "Don't look at it. Just ignore it. We don't want to know, we only live an hour or so away." But she doesn't really like to go back and spend any time on or around campus. She doesn't like to talk about this stuff, and based on that reaction, I can tell that she was really shaken by it all. So last week I spent 5 days with my ex. I'd lived with him and his mom for over a year and also worked with her. But we were fairly close, and she passed unexpectedly in her bedroom a week or so after I had left him and moved out. The first things I experienced were just things going missing. Some of this can be explained, but some I just can't. For example, my phone went missing when no one else was in the house but us. We didn't leave the house that night, and we just never found my phone. It was completely gone. Another thing that him and his sister all witnessed were a pack of cigarettes just disappearing and then reappearing on his bed several minutes later after we all searched there several times. Shit like this happened almost every day that I was there, and honestly, I thought I was going crazy at one point. Next was the change in the vibes of the place. I had never felt scared in that house before, but any time I was left alone last week, I was terrified and paranoid as hell that something was about to go down. That feeling never left the entire time I was there too. And Friday morning, the house ended up getting raided. I won't go into that. But that feeling that shit was about to go down just constantly didn't fade. I don't know if the feeling was a warning or what, no idea. But my main experience, though, was really odd, and it scared me to death. So I'd been in his bedroom just cleaning, and my ex was upstairs in the bathroom for a while. He's very loud, and he had not come downstairs for a long time, and I know this for a fact. One of his friends was out in his garage, and I also know for a fact that he wasn't in the house when this occurred, so the bedroom door is kind of set into the wall sort of really shittily, and between the wall and the door is a fairly large crack that you can see into the living room through. Lights were on in both rooms when this occurred. I was just cleaning and I suddenly felt like someone was standing outside the bedroom door. The feeling was almost unbearable as I just knew that no one was out there. I ignore it though and just put it down to being skittish, and a few minutes later I happen to look at the door, and I can see through the crack very clearly. And I see someone sitting on the floor in the living room, just angled left, half facing the door almost. I can see their face really clearly, so I knew that they were wearing glasses too. The person looked similar to my ex, but off somehow. They were looking down as if they were looking at a phone, and I take a step back and open the door, and there's no one fucking out there. I immediately walk upstairs to my ex and ask if he'd been downstairs recently, and he said no, and I told him what happened. Later, my ex's friend came inside, and I told him what had happened. He told me that when he slept on the couch when he was crashing there, that there were a few times that he woke up to go pee or go to the kitchen and whatnot, and swore that he saw my ex's mom just standing in the dark upstairs or in the kitchen. And to be honest, I just can't see her doing that. I don't know if what he saw was really her, but it terrifies me nonetheless. Also, a few days later, I told my ex's sister what happened, and she said that one day she heard her mom's voice yelling, asking her a question, but she couldn't make out what she said. I just have massive goosebumps and tears telling this story. I've had several experiences throughout my life, and had recently been thinking that it had been a while since I experienced something like this, but this definitely topped them all. So I heard about this encounter a while back where a guy was having something watch his house at night from the woods. At the time, I was pretty convinced that it was probably just an animal of some kind that he was just overreacting to, but I've experienced something similar myself, and I'm not so convinced now that it's an animal. So this weekend I was doing some 4-yard work, just mowing, hopefully for the last time this year, trimming bushes and trees, etc. It ended up being dark by the time I was finished, and I still needed to take all the trimmings to the pile in the backyard near the woods. I wasn't really concerned, and there was enough light from the house that I could get the job done. I had my headphones on and merely went about my business. At some point, though, I just got this eerie feeling. I guess you could call it the cliché being watched feeling. Obviously, as an adult male, I ignored it and continued to do what I needed to get done. After a few more trips, as I got near the brush pile again, I felt this low, grumbling sound that I couldn't actually hear since I had music playing. I took my headphones off and started looking around to see what it was coming from, and that's when I noticed a pair of reflective eyes just inside the tree line in the shadows, which is pretty startling to look up and see, even if you're used to being around wildlife. But to be honest, I actually jumped a little bit, then calmed down thinking that it must just be a deer or something. But at this point, that low grumbling sound was very clearly a grouse. I realized whatever this was probably a predator, so I cautiously dropped what I was carrying and backed my way to the house. At the eyes, they didn't move, but just stared me down the hallway. I decided to just finish cleaning up the next morning and went inside and locked up after that. I was a little shaken, but only from thinking about how close I had been to a large predator, still thinking that it was probably a bear or something. I had dinner, cleaned up, and went about relaxing after a long afternoon and evening of working outside. About 2 hours later, I happened to glance outside only to see those eyes still in the same spot, still staring at my house. The story that I had heard that I mentioned earlier, it started running through my mind, and I actually got a little bit nervous at this point. I decided, rather than hiding in my house, I was going to go and see what it was. I grabbed a flashlight and my 9mm and headed outside again. I kept a flashlight directly on the eyes as I walked across the yard, and they stared back without blinking, which was really unnerving. But what was worse was that the thing in the woods just never got clearer. It stayed a shadowy silhouette among the trees with two brightly reflecting red eyes. Even when I was close enough to see details on the trees all around it, all I could see of the thing itself was a darkness in its eyes. It was at this point that I took in the size of whatever was out there, and the eyes were level with my own, and I stand at 6 feet. But just before the tree line, the ground slopes downhill pretty steeply, which means that where this thing was standing, the ground is about 2 feet lower than where I was standing, and that made this thing at least 8 feet tall. The growling was back and louder than ever at this point, and I decided, gun or not, that this was close enough, and headed back inside again. But just like the original story, I was shaken and didn't sleep until the sun was up that morning. The eyes were there all night, and they've been there a few times ever since that night too, and I'm pretty concerned. I never saw any updates on that original story, and I didn't take the time to look for it, but I was also wondering if the OP of that story or anyone else ever figured out what it could be. The similarities between his encounter and mine are actually pretty striking, and I'd really like to know what I'm dealing with here. Did that guy ever post anything else about what he found or did about it? Any other ideas on what I should do? I'm definitely not going to be confronting it again, armed or not. So please don't suggest that. During the time that my parents were divorced and I was 15, my siblings and I would have to go and visit my father every other weekend. This would go on until I decided not to go due to some personal matters that I don't want to get into. But my father moved into this house that had been built in the 80s, I believe. Don't quote me though on this because it's been a very long time since I've been to this house. My siblings and I had a feeling right away that there was just something not right about the place. Our father and stepmother are the type that don't believe in anything, and if you told them that weird things were going on, they would just call you crazy, and they would say that we just didn't want to stay with. So the first weird thing that happened in this house was late one night. Our rooms were in the older part of the house. Our hallway connected all 3 rooms side by side to each other. Also, there was a bathroom located in front of my brother's bedroom. My room was the old master bedroom, and it had a small or tiny bathroom, and my father put a TV up in the corner. Not really for me, but more for whoever slept in that room. So I had fallen asleep to a TV show, and suddenly my sister, age 7, came running to my room and crawled into bed with me, scared. I asked her what was wrong, and she stated that there was a man staring at her in her doorway. My sister wasn't one to lie, and the way that she acted was truly terrifying. So I got up and headed to my door and looked down the hallway. I could clearly see her doorway from my bedroom door, and there was nothing there. I went back to my sister and told her that nothing was there and that she was fine and that she can sleep with me until she felt better. She agreed and went to sleep. And not more than an hour later, my brother, who was 5, came running to me and jumped into the end of the bed, waking me up, our sister staying asleep. I asked him what was wrong, and he too had a terrified look and said that there was a black figure standing in his doorway just looking at him. I sighed and got up again and checked the hallway and saw nothing, as I too could see his bathroom door from where I was. I went back to him and told him too, the same as I told my sister, and he agreed and went back to sleep. I didn't see the shadow at this time, and it seemed to just never bother me, at least at this point. But that didn't make me believe them any less, and I truly believe that they saw something. These sightings would go on like this for a while too, and my siblings would be scared and crawl into my bed and then sleep there until morning. So, to keep my sister and my brother in their room, nightlights were put in their rooms to help them sleep. This helped to a point, but it didn't stop the weirdness at all. My sister would complain too that she would watch the ceiling fan in her room and it would spin backwards on its own when it wasn't even turned on. This fan had an option to go backwards, but you had to climb up on a ladder and switch it that way, and it wasn't automatic, and it wasn't set that way anyway, and it would always go forward. You had to pull on its chain very hard to turn it on and change the speeds too. I tried to debunk this one day too when I played with her fan, and I found it weird that it would do this on its own. It was just pretty much unexplainable. I just couldn't debunk it, and at this point, I still hadn't encountered this shadow that my siblings had kept stating that they were seeing. That is, until this one night, and this was the straw that broke the camel's back. Once again, I'm in bed just watching TV, and suddenly my TV just shuts off on its own. I arched a brow a little at this, as the remote was clearly in my hand, and I hadn't rolled on it to turn off the TV or press the button to turn it off or anything. I then thought, well, it's an older TV and maybe it's just going bad or something, so I turned the TV back on. A few seconds later, my TV goes off again, and then I sit up at this and I point and stare at this TV and quickly turn it back on and watch. Seconds later, it goes off again. Now I should have been spooked right here, but I was thinking that the TV had just gone bad or something. So out of frustration, I say without thinking under my breath, as I push the button again to turn the TV back on, stop it, and click. The TV goes on, and it just stops turning itself off. I was satisfied, and so I laid my head back down onto my pillow. I know that I really should have put 2 and 2 together, but I didn't, because a second later my brother comes running to me saying that he can't sleep and was scared, so he crawls into the bed next to me, and we just watched some TV. We were watching TV, and then the room just suddenly got really cold. There's a window at the end of my bed, so I look up to see if maybe I forgot to close it, but no, it's closed and the blinds are down. My brother and I ignored it while we pulled the extra blanket over us and just kept watching TV. Then my brother whispers to me, "See him?" I arch my brow a bit confused as I whispered back, looking down at my brother, "See who?" He gestures with his hand still holding the covers toward his chest, and I look over toward my door, and I finally see what he sees. There's this large black shadow of what appears to be a male just staring at us. There was no face or anything, just a very tall male in shape figure. I blinked twice to make sure that I was seeing what I was seeing. It was as if this thing knew what I was doing, and as to say, "No, I'm here." The blinds above our head began to bang hard against the window as if a big gust of wind was just hitting them. I'll repeat again that the window was closed. There was no other way that this could be happening to, unless I was physically grabbing these blinds and slamming them hard against the window myself, which obviously I wasn't. I could tell that my brother was terrified and had pushed himself closer to me, and I'm a mix of emotions of fear, worry, protection. There's no way will I let this thing get anywhere near my brother, and so I pull my brother close to me and glare now at the shadow. I don't know if I said this out loud or in my mind, but I know I was thinking enough. I know it sounds kind of comical, but believe me, to be able to be thinking that while you're staring at this obviously intimidating thing wasn't easy. I guess it hurt me as suddenly the blinds just stopped moving and the shadow just disappeared right in front of us. I told my brother that we were safe and he could sleep in my room until morning. While we slept, I got up and went to check my sister, as now I was really concerned for her, and to my relief, she was fine and fast asleep. That night, I slept on the floor in front of my door so that I could watch my sister's door, and my brother who was in my bed the rest of the night. It wasn't comfortable at all, but I did it, and the shadow just didn't reappear that night, thank goodness. To this day, that shadow is still there, but the last time I went back to my father's home was when I was 19, and I've just never been back. I'm now 35, and my sister and brother are much older, and they tell me of stories after I left, that the shadow is still there, and our father and stepmother still believe it's just the old house playing tricks on them. I don't know what that thing is or how it got there, or if it's a ghost or a shadow person or what, but I know what I saw and it was creepy. I live in the UK, and here carp fishing is the most popular form of freshwater fishing, and I love it. I was fishing on a private lake in the middle of a dense old woodland, the sort of trees that you would imagine in a haunted woods in a fantasy film or something. The lake itself was an old estate lake that used to be a rich person's land. However, only a small part of the original manor remained. As odds are prevalent in the area, it's fenced off with electric fences, and to gain access, you must know the padlock code at the entrance. It was about 11 p.m., and I was sitting in my bivvy, similar to a tent, and the last of the day's light had all gone out at this point. I was making a coffee, and I could hear twigs breaking and the unmistakable sound of footsteps. I thought that it might be the only other guy fishing the lake coming over to ask me to take a photo of a fish that he caught. But once I looked out there was nothing there. The almost full moon illuminated the area, yet there was no sign of anything bar a few birds frantically calling to each other. I was a little confused because I was certain that I heard footsteps, but this is a common occurrence when fishing at night, and every fisherman will tell you of the time that he was certain there was somebody walking behind them, yet when they checked nobody was there. So I just reasoned that it was my mind playing tricks on. However, as the night wore on, I just kept hearing the footsteps. Every time they seemed to be louder than the last two. Now, I'm not a small guy, and I'm not easily spooked, so I was just getting annoyed at it at this point. I turned my head torch on and shone it around, asking who was there. The head torch shone through the trees, illuminating the trees in a tunnel vision fashion. Yet nobody was there, and it was then that I started to feel uneasy. Half an hour had went on and I drifted back to sleep. That is until the footsteps were back. But this time they were closer and much clearer. I had a mallet in one hand and a knife in the other, and shone my head torch around the area, and to my horror, there was a middle-aged woman just standing there.
It made me jump out of my skin, but as I'm not one to particularly believe in the paranormal, I thought that she'd somehow just wandered on, got past the fence, and was lost or something. I asked if she was okay, and she started to talk about how her husband that passed away just loved to go fishing. Yet, whenever he asked her to come, she would turn him down as she hated the outdoors. And so now she likes to go on walks around lakes and rivers. But bear in mind, the nearest village is 5 miles away through a forest, or 10 miles if you were to walk along the paths, and it was around 3 a.m. at this point because apparently it makes her feel close to him. I tried to give her some advice, and she laughed, saying that men always try to think of something smart to say when we don't know what to say. She said goodbye and then just left. The next morning, I walked over to where the other guy was fishing and told him the story and asked if he'd seen her or had she even gotten into the land in the first place. He said that he hadn't seen her, but apparently he heard the sound of a woman crying at different parts of the night, but was too scared to go and check it out. He was as confused as I was, and when the bailiff came around, I told him the story, and he said that he wouldn't know how it could happen, as there's a motion sensor that trips as you walk through the gate in case of poachers and all that, and that's on all night. He actually didn't believe me too until he came around to talk to the other guy, and he put his side of the story to him. He was as confused as we were, and to this day, nobody knows who that woman was or how she ever came to be on the land. I'd like to preface this story by saying that it's not my encounter, but my great-aunt's encounter. She told this story to me a few years back after many years of pestering her about it. I had grown up knowing vague details of this story, but they're never the full thing. I did record the entire conversation that we had, in fact, amongst my great-aunt and a few other members of my family and myself. To this day, I still have the recording on my phone, and I'll find a way to post it there, so if you've got that interest, you can find it. But for now, here's the exact conversation that we had, with some slight changes to names for privacy. Devin and I were younger, and before we got married, and even afterwards, we had a Ouija board at our house, and we think that this might have been the cause of everything that came after. Anyways, we used to play the Ouija board all the time, and one night when we got married, we moved into his mobile home down the road, further down from where we are now. Michael was born, but he was only about a year or so old, and Billy Joe was a baby. So Trisha, his aunt's sister, had a boyfriend named Brian. One day I came home from work. On the very first day I had this brand new job at MSI, and the babysitter had told me that Brian had been there that day, and that he really wanted to see me, and that it was important. I tried to call, but there was no answer. I tried and tried, but there was still no answer, so I thought that if it really was that important, that he would just come back. And well, he actually ended himself. He went home that day, and that was it. So, of course, my question was, what did he want me for? Why did he want to see me? Well, about a year later, we got the Ouija board out. We were having a party, and we were just young and stupid. We were only about 18 or 19 years old at the time, and so I asked the Ouija board, with 2 other people doing it, what did Brian want to see me about that day? He came back and said that his name was Link, which was Brian's nickname, Lynk. It was Jesse and Gary that were working at it. I said, "What do you want to see me about?" And the board said that he wanted to tell me that he had caught David and Trisha kissing each other at the shack. David and I were already married, so there were denials and whatever, but it turns out that it was actually true. That's exactly what happened. He had caught them kissing each other, and that's why I broke up with Trisha. So that's all he wanted to see me about, apparently. Within a couple of weeks, Michael started seeing an imaginary friend, too. When Michael got old enough to talk, he would say stuff like, "Can I go out and play?" Barta was out there waiting for me. He started throwing his toys out the front room window, off the trailer, and we'd get up, and they'd just be all gone. Everything in the room would be just gone out the window, and we'd ask, "Why'd you do that?" And he'd say, "Well, Bardo made him do it." And to be honest, we didn't know what to do because we just thought that Bardo was an imaginary friend. So then Billy, he gets old enough to talk, and he's really scared of everything at this point. He's scared of his own shadow, in fact, and he clung to me for most of his life, and he slept on my chest until he was about 10. One night, he kept saying that he was seeing this person in his closet, and it was a mobile home, right? So the closet is tiny, and so was the bedroom. David and I were laying in bed. It was a summer night, and Billy Joe said, "Mom, he's bothering me." I said, "Just go to sleep, honey, it's okay." And then we heard talking through the walls. Like chattering with someone, but not loud enough to hear the words. Like a child's voice heard softly through really thin walls. And then we heard a response. A deep voice, low and guttural, answering back. I was terrified and in disbelief. I said, "Billy, run to Mummy, baby." So he did, and he came running, and then I had to go and get Michael because he was in the next room down. I was terrified, and so was David. David was so terrified that he wouldn't even get out of bed to go to get Michael. David kept Billy Joe with him, and I had to go and get Michael. And we actually didn't move the next day. And it was then that we started saying, okay, what did you see? Who is it? And all that sort of stuff. And we come to find out that both the boys, started explaining things. Apparently, he was a little man and his name was Bardo. He wore a banner across his chest and it said Barno on it, though at the time we didn't know it said anything, just that they described this ribbon going across his chest with letters on it. He was also always in the backyard, trying to get them both to come out. Then we moved, and about 3 years later, they started putting videos on TV, and it was a Thursday night show. Michael Jackson was the first video that we had ever seen, and his 1983 Thriller, I think it was. In one of those videos, we were sitting there watching, and one of the subliminal messages that he was putting in his video, he was trying to make fun of The Exorcist or something, was this little man. He was about 3 feet tall, a little gremlin, and there was a banner across his chest that said Bardo on it. We thought, holy crap, that's him. David came home and we just kept watching because we didn't have a VCR. There was no such thing as a VCR back then, so there was just no way to see it, unless we just kept waiting for them to put the video on again. David saw it, and we talked about it, and chalked it up to a coincidence so as not to scare the boys. Now, when David was little, he used to see someone he called the Spring Man, too. He was absolutely terrified of him, and had had experience with this Spring Man as a child that was similar to the experiences the boys did with Bardo only a couple of years before. So, we were watching a Stephen King movie one night, and it was about a man that was scared to death to get on a plane. Well, this plane started doing the whole shaky thing. Turbulence, it was storming out, and the guy looks out the window and there was Bardo on the wing of the plane, only without the banner this time. At this point, my aunt gets into discussions about this show, and they realize it was not a Stephen King movie, but in fact a Twilight Zone. It's the scene with the gremlin on the wing of the plane. You can look it up on Google to see pictures.
And it was at this point that David pipes up and says, "That's the Spring Man." So not only had David seen him as a child, but so would the boys. That was all I could get out of her on the subject, which was more than enough for me, I must say. I looked up the picture of the gremlin from the scene in the Twilight Zone, and it brought my aunt to tears almost. They're still very much afraid of these experiences, but there were many more apparently, but were not mentioned in this story. Even Billy, 40 years old today, refuses to acknowledge or talk about any of these experiences. Anyway, I'll try and find out more about these experiences, and thanks for listening, guys. Whenever I get into conversations with friends in college about paranormal things, I always want to tell them this story, but it just creeps me out so thoroughly that I hesitate. So, this involves my friend Billy and his brother Denny. Billy and Denny are both over 6 feet tall and pretty stocky dudes. Denny is a year older though and much bigger, and they've had pretty rough lives. Their mother actually ended her life when they were younger, and father passed away a few months ago after they made a reconnection years and years later. So I feel like they've had a connection to seeing and experiencing strange things for some reason, and that's why I partially found this encounter to be so frightening. So one night at about 1 a.m., my friend Billy heard frantic banging on his door. He looked through the peephole to see Denny banging on the door and begging Billy open the fucking door over and over again. Billy opens the door and Denny stumbles in covered in sweat and absolute terror. Billy's in shock and completely confused, so he closes the door and comforts Denny, asking what the hell happened. Denny then goes on to describe what happened just before he opened the door. So apparently Denny pulls into the driveway of the house, turns off his lights, gets out, and locks his car door. And as he's walking towards the front door, he sees his own shadow against the garage door, and it kind of startles him. As he begins to calm back down, he looks back up at his shadow and notices that something just is off. He can't see the trail of his shadow from his feet to the garage door. He just sees his shadow perfectly outlined in the garage door as though it was painted there. He then realizes that the only light source on that part of the street is to his right, meaning that his shadow should be to the left, not directly in front of him. Denny stares at this shadow, seeing that it has the very obvious outline of a person, and so well outlined as if an industrial light was shining behind him, making the shadow a perfect and very apparent black shadow. Suddenly, the shadow ducks low and moves quickly across the garage door and disappears from view without a single sound being made. Denny obviously flips the fuck out and runs to his front door and starts knocking ferociously to alert Billy. As he's doing this, he notices something on the lawn to his left. He notices the same shadow, the same size, just standing there. Only this shadow was not painted across a tree or a garage door, but literally just standing on its own in the yard. No breathing, no movement of any kind, just standing and watching. Then slowly, it begins to crouch slightly and back up into the mess of trees and bushes lining the next house over. Needless to say, I haven't been back to their place ever since then. So right around July, I found a sweet deal on a place. Looked very nice and spacious, really cheap, and also provides awesome internet. It'd be great for my first place to live. But ever since I moved in, though, I've been wondering if maybe I was wrong. When I first moved in, things already started going weird. I didn't unpack for the first 2 days since I moved in my first day, but had a concert that night along with work, so I moved all of my stuff in, but everything stayed packed up except for necessities. Immediately upon coming home the next morning, I noticed something strange going on. I had set my box of kitchenware in the kitchen when I moved in, so that it would be easy to unpack, but when I came home from work, I saw pants sitting on the stove. I knew that this was strange as I went out to eat after the concert the previous night. I played it off as me just taking some time out when I first got in the place, and just forgot about the action. The following nights, other mildly creepy things happened. Despite being alone, I would hear noises of other people moving around in my place. At first I ignored it since I'm used to living in apartments which are connected to other places, and we hear movement in other apartments quite frequently. However, I remember this new place isn't connected to anyone else's home, and I really shouldn't be hearing movement like this. On another night, I had washed my pants and laid them flat on my counter to dry with rags underneath and all that, and I woke up to a loud noise and found my pants just all over the place. One in the sink, 2 on the floor, and the last on a completely separate counter. At this point, I was officially freaked out now. I mean, these kinds of things have been going on now for a little while. Nothing dangerous and mildly rare occurrences, but they do happen. Tonight, though, was the first time that I'd seen it with my own eyes. So I was sitting at home just watching videos, and I started hearing people talk. Almost right in my ear, in fact. I guess that maybe someone was outside just talking, but there was no one around my place. So I started freaking out a bit, and I got up to get a can of pop as sugar comforts me. And as I finished my drink and set it down, it just suddenly flies across the room. I freeze. And then multiple things in my living room just begin to be thrown around, and even a candle, which had thankfully not been lit, mind you. I ran out of my house as my anxiety makes me a giant coward, and when I finally mustered up the strength to go back in and get a video of it, the action just died down. I have a theory, though, as to what's going on here. I live in a pretty ghetto area with nice places kind of scattered around a bit, so as not to make the place look totally run down, if you catch my drift. I've lived in this general area for about 10 years, I'd say, only moving a block away from my old apartment. This area sees just all kinds of crime. I know 2 people who have been killed right outside of my given area, in fact. An apartment building just next door to me had recently been burned down too, and I don't know what the death toll is from there, but maybe that was also part of this activity. I don't know a lot about the paranormal, these are just guesses. There are way more incidences than this too, but this is already getting long, so I'll try and end it here. I'd like to know, though, what your thoughts are. Am I in danger? Do you have any advice? I can try to get footage, but it's hard as I don't own a camera to tape with while I'm gone. But if you guys have any thoughts to share, please do. This happened almost 10 years ago now. I was a 12-year-old girl, a typical tomboy. My friends were mostly guys a couple of years older. I was pretty confident in myself too, and wasn't one to steer out of trouble if I was with my friends. One day in the middle of June, I was walking home from my stop. It was like a 5 or 10 minute walk, nothing too far for a kid my age. I remember the sun was setting, so it was starting to get dark, but wasn't too dark yet. Since it was June, most people were off the streets too, either on holiday or just at home, so I was walking home alone at this point. The street itself wasn't very well lit, but in my mind it was okay since, it was the shortest route home, B. It wasn't really dark outside, and see, one of my friends gave me a butterfly knife. A really cheap knife, but I was feeling badass and well prepared. I was walking, totally spaced out, when suddenly I felt someone grab me. For a second, I thought it was a friend who happened to just walk by and scare me. But I remember feeling something was off at that point. The hands that were holding me were not those of a 14 or 15-year-old boy, but more manly, and one of them was trying to reach into my t-shirt. And then I felt a chill when I heard the man speak. He said in my native tongue, "Behave, you little whore." I remember that he somewhat slurred the words too, not that he was drunk, but as if he was on drugs or just plain crazy, and that his breath just stank of real bad milk. I started struggling, desperately trying to get free from his arms, and I don't think that I've ever been more terrified. I managed to reach with one of my hands to my cargo shorts that had many pockets and deep ones at that, but managed to grab a knife at this point. He tried to tug at my hand, and I almost dropped my weapon, and in that split second, I was convinced that I was about to end up dead. I managed to grab it, though, and didn't even open it all the way and stabbed the man in his thigh. I doubt I made any actual damage to him, but it definitely startled him enough so that he loosened his grip. I managed to wriggle free and started running for my dear life straight home. He was swearing at me, and I could hear his footsteps behind me at one point. I felt the need to turn around, but I didn't give in because I was frightened that if I did turn around, I'd see how close he actually was and maybe trip over or something. Not to mention that he probably had my knife at this point. I managed to turn to the door to my home, and I pretty much crashed into it. But luck was definitely on my side because I managed to unlock the door to the apartment building pretty quickly, and I just ran upstairs. To this day, almost 10 years ago, I have this reoccurring nightmare. I notice someone looking at me, and I feel in my gut that he has bad intentions, so I run and he runs after me. It's always the same route as the actual event too, and it's always the same footsteps, and I always almost smash my face in the front door and just desperately try to find my key to open it. Anyway, I was pretty lucky to get away that day, I know that much. This happened a couple of years ago, but I feel like I'm ready to talk about it. So in 2016, I just turned 18 and was in my second semester of community college. I was lucky to get to take a few specialized classes that were requirements for my major too. These classes required me to drive about 45 minutes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to the main campus of my community college system. That's relevant because I was going to a town that I didn't know much about and didn't know anyone who lived there too. There was a man in my class named Eddie. He was a big guy in his late 40s. I'm 5'0", and at the time was about 130 pounds, which was just to say that I was pretty small and defenseless. We spent a lot of time in the lab for these classes too, and he was stationed right across from me. I was a bit more naive and unsuspecting at the time and wanted to be nice, so I'd talk with him and my other classmates quite a bit and was a lot friendlier to him than I would have been nowadays. He started being over-friendly to me and would just stand too close and ask too many personal questions if he'd catch my drift. He'd flirt with me in class too, to the point that it seemed to make other people uncomfortable to watch. He also started staring at me a lot, with an intense look that honestly just scared me. Of course, me being young and not wanting to hurt his feelings, I decided to just ignore it as best as I could, and I told my boyfriend about it. But again, Eddie hadn't actually done anything to me, so there wasn't a whole lot that I felt like I could do. So a few weeks after that started, all of us were hanging out in a small break room type area, studying for an exam in our next class, which was about 30 minutes away. I was sitting at one table just chatting with some middle-aged women in my class, and Eddie was at the next table over just messing with his phone. I announced that I was going to get something from the vending machine and stood up, and as I did, he tried and failed to discreetly turn his phone toward me and snap pictures of me as I walked to the machine. Mind you, I was getting my drink and was bent over at the time to pick it up. I realized what was going on as I was walking back to my seat with him still taking photos, and I showed him a look. He put his phone away and just sat there staring at it. I was trying to look pissed, but honestly, I was just really freaked out. I excused myself from the table and called my boyfriend near in tears, telling him what happened. He was angry and said that I need to tell someone, but I said no. I didn't want to make a scene. He tried to comfort me as much as he could, but I had to go to class soon afterwards. Our last class finished at about 9 p.m., and since it was January, it was completely dark out when we walked to our cars. I was actually texting one of my guy friends about what had happened when Eddie walked up to my car, stopped for a second and looked at me through my windshield, then slowly just kept walking, watching me through my driver's side window the whole time. He was parked nowhere near me, and the windshield was below zero at this point, so he had to have made a point to walk to my car like that. I was terrified, and with my hands shaking, I started my car and drove home as fast as I could.